Yeah. This is us, agenda. So we're right now at agenda review. I'm going to go over why arts. So what's the big deal? Why is it important? And how it can help you. And we'll cover design and concepts, and what are some of the ways of processing design, and just look at all our options. And we'll use this tool that we've created in the making, has been in the making for years now. This Arts in Action Flowchart. It's an arts guide that we have. You'll be able to see it soon. And we also have stencils. We're going to go right into stencils. And Zeph is going to run that demonstration, and there'll be a video and walk you through all the takeaways that need to come out of that presentation. We'll actually have a little activity where we'll try it ourselves and then transition onto spray paint. We're all familiar with it. We know what it is, but like we'll basically take it apart, talk about the safety. Asa is going to cover the types of spray can, how they're used, all the moving parts to it, the tips that make different sizes and stuff. And we'll go into application, like actually applying it using stencils. And then we will go into both Asa and Zeph will be sharing examples. So we'll get to see some examples in our slideshow. Our group poster project will be our breakout rooms, and this is basically for folks to get together and brainstorm a design and come up with there'll be some guidelines that we'll share at the end. And when you go into these breakout rooms, you'll introduce yourselves and you'll share contact info, and hopefully you all can work through the next few days and come up with a concept. There'll be some topics that you can choose, but we'll explain a little bit more when we get there. And then we'll do closing. And then we'll share the homework, and we'll share a survey, and then share the folder with you at the end so you all can check it out. Next slide. So at the beginning of this, we had a materials list that was suggested out there. So part of the challenging thing in online trainings is that we normally provide the materials for free, and travel and a place to stay. And so unfortunately we can't do that right now. So I'm just going to provide you a list of materials that you might have and things that you might improvise in with. And so we'll leave this up here for you. You're going to be able to get to use this slideshow and go back. You'll have a copy of this in the arts folder. Next. So now for why arts. I'm going to be using the terms arts in action, arts in activism, arts action. And so basically how does that benefit us, right? So I just wanted to ask everyone to take a moment right now and see if they can recall a moment in your personal experience. Was there ever a moment you were moved by art and activism? So, and thinking about when that was and why was it what was it that you can recall that got your attention? And we'll break that down and see how you can see it as yourself as an audience viewing this art piece. And what was that like? If you like, you can share that in the chat box. We'll give a little bit of time to pass there. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. So I'm going to go into this slideshow, and we're just basically going to talk about these images that we pulled out. For this one, I would like just to ask the question: what is your story? What is the story of your message? Right. This is from a social media site. This group, Red Nation, put this out, and this is a parade that happens, and they took over this one section. Clearly, there's a lot of issues that are being covered here. Save the Confluence, No DAPL, there's some Standing Rock stuff there. There's you can't drink oil messages, free Peltier. So when you're going to these protests and you're doing these actions and you want to bring visuals, it's important to understand like what it is about, who's doing it. Are you in supportive in a supportive role, or it's generally a good idea to know who's running it and whose action it is. Next. This one is back in the day on a college campus. Sometimes, you know, you have to come up with a design or a visual on the fly, and you know, you might have to stay up all night to sew that banner and paint it and come up with a message. But did you practice, right? Did you practice, get a chance to practice your visual? In this case, you know, the sunlight is kind of like messing with your image because of the shadows, the way it's drooping and it's tilted to the right, the way it's rigged up. So in these trainings, we talk about these and how we can reinforce and have our visuals stand out most. Next slide. This one's another example of like, whose action is it, right? This is from the first photo that I showed. This is a person standing alone with a personal sign, listing all the environmental issues that are happening out there current, and but with you know, all these different colors, there's a lot of people conveying a lot of stories and a lot of message. So how can you make it so your story stands out or your message stands out? Is there a message behind that sign for people that are behind you? You know, some things to consider. Next slide. This one's a good example to be aware of how far your audience is from your visual. This is several stories up from viewing it from the ground. Again, it's wise to take measures of understanding like where the position of the sun is and on your visual. Again, using the different colors that can stand out from further distance is really important. Next slide. This one is an example of an action that was done under poor lighting. Even though there's poor lighting with artificial lighting on the streets there's some things that you can't read on their chests, but you can see the banner with the black and white colors. It's held perfectly for this photographer to take photos of. And then the props that they're using in their lock boxes have messages on them. And so it's quite hard to miss like what's going on there. And this is it's pretty awesome, pretty good visuals. So it's again, it's the job of the photographer to make these look good, but it's also our job to make that job easier. Next. Awesome. This one's an example of some time ago. Sometimes your photos get transferred to black and white, right? Or it's taken in black and white. So consistency is really important in your message. It's hard to miss what those signs say because there's so many of them. And it's pretty contrast, right? It's very legible, and you can see it. And so that's pretty amazing as you can get all these people in the frame, but you're also getting the visuals in the frame. Next one. Sometimes your work is partially done for you. You just got to add a little to it, you know, give it a little flavor to it and chisel off those rough edges or add to it, you know. So altering existing signs and visuals out there is really important. And taking into consideration, this is a billboard that's probably for moving traffic, right? So you're going at speed, whether it's 65 or 10 miles an hour, are you gonna be able to read that sign? And so people who are professionals in marketing and advertisement, you know, like if you were to go up and measure that word crime, like how tall is it and how wide is it? And the spacing in it is very on purpose so people can read them, right? Next slide. This one's a Greenpeace action that happened in San Francisco. How do we know that? Because of the backdrop. The Golden Gate Bridge there pretty stands out, pretty recognizable. These are letters that are individually cut and molded, wood that was bent and glued and constructed together with pieces of discarded plastic bottles, plastic, basically garbage that has been collected. And inside it has LED lights that all are powered by battery. And so the goal of this action was to do it while the sun was, you know, kind of, it was still dark, and then light it up. But there was technical difficulties they were running into, and so they didn't quite get the image that they want because the sun came up on them, but it still stood out, right? It still stood out where the positioning of the letters are right on the horizon of where the water meets land. And so you can read the letters. And so that's really, really important. Had this person who took this photo been a little bit lower or taller, maybe the words would have been lost in that, but good job. Next. And then this one, slide is just basically, these are clips that we pull from our manual. And so concept, so we start with concept, you know, you got the light bulb there. When you come up with an idea, first things first, you need a message that's going to tell your story. Then the process of art will start happening where you're physically sketching it, or you're going to take it into a digital format. And then we'll talk about where all the possibilities, that different roads you can take in doing a personal art piece or running an art bill. And so some things to consider is message. There's some notes there where it talks about like word choices. Are you matching your image with your message? So it's good to run a few trials to see how it looks. How many words are you using, and how urgent is your action? And so like, should your message address that? In design, you're thinking about word spacings. Font choices are really important. I talked a little bit about contrast. Are your colors contrasting each other? Are you going to use text or text only, or are you going to add an image to it? And so execution is just basically, how is it done? Is it timely? Do you have enough time for it to dry? Do you have not enough time for the process of it to? Is it cleanly painted? Is it legible, and is it readable? Is there any backlit? Like the San Francisco Break Free from Plastic was talking about, like, what does your background look like? You know, you don't want to hang a white light message banner on a sky that's pretty bright, right? Because your visual will be lost in it. Some the challenges that we have is like glass office buildings sometimes change throughout the day because of what it's reflecting. So some of those things to take in consideration. Mass unity in your colors is really important also. And then lastly, but is pretty crucial and pretty important, is like, who's your community and where's your help, right? Who's going to support you in this process? And then how do you outreach to those people to help you and get you on board? And who's going to stick around for cleanup, right? And so messaging really touches a lot of parts in, is it motivating your audience is something you want to consider. Is it simple is like sometimes always the best for your audience. Keeping it simple so someone can understand it under less than 10 seconds. So that means like knowing your audience. Who is your audience? Are they gonna understand this? A lot of times with Greenpeace, we and movements that I work with, we're so involved in our work and so involved in the issues that are in front of us that we start to tend to our messaging is like becomes our message, and only we can understand it. So it's important to step away from that and ask like an Uncle Bob or an Auntie Rose or somebody who's not involved in your movement or your action, to say, run by them like, hey, does this make sense to you? You know, do you understand what this is about? And so like, who are the characters in that, and what is the story that's being told, right? So creating a story that people can follow is really important. Next slide. So we came up with this arts flowchart And I'm going to show you here in a bit, but I just want to talk a little bit about the background and how this came to be. So we started this by like breaking apart art bills or just action art in general, like coming up with a vision and then an end product, and then working backwards, like how do we make this banner and all the steps needed to get to, like, where do we start and where do we need help and what do we need prep before we ask for help, right? So working backwards. What happens in between, so that this flowchart will show all the different actions and all the different mediums that are involved and prepping for that. So this will allow you to ask yourself if you're prepared or how much time do you need, right? So a lot of campaigners are so busy in their work that that's not like a real world that a lot of people understand. And so having a flowchart to explain it to people is helpful. And then, yeah, where do you need support and what is my goal? So what is your goal throughout the process? But what is your end goal? Like, how many of these things are you going to make? Or like, how big are they going to be? And how are you going to get it to where it needs to be in the action? So transportation is also part of it. So next slide. This is an example of when we first started this after countless hours of no sleep. A bunch of trainers got together and came up with this flowchart. And this is as clean as we got it. And we took a photo of it, but it was pretty intense. There was a lot of more lines. There was a lot more scribbles, and it just looked like this. It looked like the internet if you were to draw it out. So if you follow this along concept, the all-seeing eye at the top there, and then all the possible options happening. And so after talking about it a few times and then sharing it with graphic designers, we came up with this next slide, which will be in your manual. So at the very top, the image that I showed you before was the start of the process. And so from this, we're going to learn stencil, which is in there. It's an action. And spray painting stencils is also an action. So all the circles around, the yellow circles are all actions, and the dark colored solid pieces are the mediums, like for an example, lino block, screen printing, ASCIIs, banners. And so I'm just gonna take a mental picture of that. You'll definitely have this in your hands to use for future references. But if you go to the next slide, I'm just gonna take out the parts that we're gonna be working on today. And so your design concept is in the middle, right? Where you come up with that, you come up with your message. And so some of us are gonna quickly, if we're computer savvy, that's where we're gonna go. But if we need to sketch it out, so we use a freehand there, draw, paint, and cut. And so that will allow us to go down to paper mediums, and then we'll go right into our stencils. But if you're going the computer route, you have the option of printing on transparency or paper, which will allow you to trace or cut your stencil out. Or in this case, since we're just practicing, we encourage a lot of people who are just starting out to use paper. To use paper and then cut it with the tools that they have, and your stencil is created, and then you can use application with your spray paint. Next slide. Next slide this slide is an example of the steps. So in this, you see at the very bottom, there's a sketch, right? And then that's either cut out of that fish. You can see the overall. And then there's another stencil inside it, which has the word endure in. And so this will help you create like a mass production of things. This was a design idea for signs, individual signs that people can carry with a stick inside. So you would sandwich the fish in between this, the handle, but you have a message on both sides, right? So next one. I'm just showing examples of stencils, the idea of stencils, and using them in other ways than besides spray paint. So here is the Greenpeace office. we've used butcher block large pieces to cut the a message out, and we just taped them right onto the wall. And so it was a little bit hard to see during the day, but once the sun went down, the lights inside were on timers and they turned on. So if you go to the next page, you see like right underneath the Kaiser Permanente, you see Black Lives Matter. And this is downtown Oakland. So we put these lights on timers, so during the nighttime they stay on, and then during the day they shut off. That's a one use of stencil. So this next series of, you can go to the next slide, next series of photos is just an example of taking a large stencil that's been taped, you can see the pieces of tape taped together. This is an unpermitted event in San Francisco, and it's basically to do a mural in front of the Wells Fargo headquarters. Next slide. You're seeing people unfold it. We use a large stencil to speed up the process because we want to do it as quickly as possible for a photo op. Next slide. So now it's laid down all the way, and the weight of it itself is just on the ground, and people are taking chalks and outlining it. And while this is happening, there are people on both sides who are just freehanding letters using a grid system, which we'll learn in the next Friday in our layout training. Next slide. So then the chalk is traced with paint, and then it's filled. Go to the next one. And it's filled in. And then next slide, you can see the in piece there. This is on a street in the financial district in San Francisco. The next slide will show you an aerial photo looking up, bird's eye view from above. So this paint is still drying, and this is the image that we were going for. We had blockaders on both sides block traffic, so people were asked to go in other routes. So this street was clear. And then the next slide. This is just an example of like how far your stencil can go. This turned out to be a stencil, and then it was put onto a lino cut, I think, and then printed, and then in the computer, we made it bigger, and then it became a t-shirt image for in solidarity with folks in the islands in Hawaii. And so this was a design that they were talking about, and we helped them with that. And so this is a photo emulsion. Really, it's really actually a stencil. It's a screen. It's a silk screen photo emulsion burn where you run paint through. So the mesh of the screen is your actual stencil holding these little parts together to make your design. And we'll understand this more as we do go through the series. Next one. Okay, and now I pass it on to Zeph.
Cool. Hello. So just to keep going from what Sai was saying, like the basic idea of a stencil is it's a good building block to thinking about how to create more complex images, because a stencil is basically black or white, or it's literally in a stencil, it's either the paper, this would be the negative part of the image, and then the positive part of the image is the whole, so the part that gets sprayed through. So it's either kind of on or off. It's a binary image. And you can then play with that. You can add more complexity to that, but it's a good place to start when you're creating your design. It's either black or it's white. And then one thing to be looking at while you're creating your design too is that because you're going to cut the holes out of the paper, sometimes there will be a shape that is contained within the larger shape. So in the example of this slide, in the top right where it says island, like that little triangle in the A, if you cut that out without doing anything else, that part of the A will just fall out. And so you have to put in these little lines called bridges that will be the thing that will kind of keep that little A intact inside the stencil to hold it, so that when you spray paint through it, you'll still see that little triangle. And that will be part of like the negative space of the image. And I also this is my own little addition of terminology, that there's a thing that I would call a peninsula, which is that that bottom sort of shape in the A, if you didn't add those bridges, that part will stay because it's connected to the rest of the paper. But as you, depending on the material you're using, it may get kind of floppy. And so sometimes putting a bridge on something like that is important too. So just to say, maybe just to back up for a second and talk about materials for stencils. You can, like cardboard, obviously, one of the materials that makes the world go round. You can use this for your cutting mat, and you can make stencils with cardboard. The disadvantages of that is that it's hard to cut this stuff in a very precise way. But the advantages of it is it's a little bit stiffer. So that is one material you can use. Another material you can use is this kind of thinner cardboard. This is basically just a cereal box. And again, this is like a little bit harder to cut, but these kind of, this is what I would call like a peninsula, where it's a shape that is sort of sticks out a lot. And that, as you can see, it's like a little bit bendy. But on this different material, that can work, but you might want to put an island, a bridge on that. And then here's another material that Greenpeace uses a lot, which is basically like paper bag or butcher paper backed with masking tape that will give it a little bit more durability and will keep it from getting too soggy when you use the spray paint on it. And this is relatively easy to cut and pretty versatile. So, so just to point that out, there's different materials. I'm going to play a quick little video. Let's see, I will share my screen. Desktop. Share. Can you see the video right now? Is my video showing up?
Yes, but it's not playing.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just start it. So I just did a little intro about the materials. This is a very like quick 3-minute video. So here we go. Just setting up the materials. This is putting the masking tape on. To show you, just like slightly overlapping it just to create this other layer that's much more water resistant. And then I usually start by sort of sketching in the images, and then let's just stop this for 1 second. Back up slightly. So you can see on the A on the left here, that inner triangle, that's what we're calling an island. That if I just cut around the whole exterior of that A, that whole shape would fall out and you would not have that little triangle. And so, and this is a fairly simple example, but sometimes when you're doing a design, it's not that easy to tell which parts are islands or which parts will fall out. So for me, when I'm drawing, it's really helpful at some point to actually sketch in the parts that are going to be the positives of the image, which is the part that when I spray the paint, that's where the paint is going to go through. So that's going to be the hole in the paper. So I sketch in that part so I can really see where the islands are. And that's where I'm like identifying that that's going to be an island, and I'm adding these little bridges just so that that part won't fall out. And so here, that's going to have like 2 bridges and this little island in the middle. And I'm going to continue just loosely sketching in the part that I'm going to cut out so I can really see it well. And then the other one, I'm doing it really the opposite. So basically like in one case, the A is going to be the positive where the spray paint is going to go through, and the other one is the negative. And here is our X-Acto blade, and I'm just demonstrating how you can kind of keep the sharp point in the handle so that it stays sharp and doesn't cut you while you're just storing it. So we're just cutting out the positive part of the stencil, which is again the part that is going to be the hole where the spray paint is going to go through. And there I am just pointing out that island. And I'm going to also just demonstrate what happens if you remove those bridges. So here's me removing one bridge, which really actually just turns that little piece into a peninsula. But as you can see, it's very floppy, and that's not going to last very long once you start spray painting it, or it might just get either just curl up or get soggy and kind of fall off. So just showing, again, if I don't have any bridges and that piece just has nothing to hold on to it. So, if you do accidentally create an island that you didn't put bridges on, you can just go back and repair it. You can always add bridges with masking tape later. If you make a mistake in your stencil design, it's no big deal. You can just fix it and it's fine. So there we go, just fixing that right up. And then it's ready to spray paint. We've created these, you can see how one of these is positive and one of these is negative in terms of the A itself. So that, and Ace is going to show us some better spray painting techniques so that doesn't look fuzzy like that. And I'm going to stop sharing that. And yeah, so just to talk a little bit more about materials and peninsulas. So on this is the sort of cereal box material. Again, like, you know, in this case, I'm leaving the peninsula loose because it sort of works. Again, depending on how many times you're going to use the stencil. And also Ace is going to show us how you can use a spray adhesive that helps those things stay down. And in this case, this would be a peninsula if I didn't put this little bridge here. Like this part of the U would be pretty floppy too. So this is just different ways to think about your design as you're making it. So let's see, let's go back to the slideshow, Harmony. Cool. So I just pulled out some different examples of artist stencil designs, just to look again at. So for instance, these three are the same letters, but they're different kinds of fonts. And so the artists who designed these put the bridges in different places. And you can see that in some of these cases, there are islands in these letters. So for instance, the holes in the B would be islands that would just fall out if you didn't have the bridges that go vertically there. Or the A and the top part of the A, for instance, would just be an island. Then you also have peninsulas. So for instance, the two gaps in the E, if you didn't have those little bridges, those would be kind of like long pieces with only support on one end. And so those would get kind of floppy. And so that's why the artist put in that vertical line, the bridges to hold those together. Or for instance, those large circles inside of the S, like you technically, if you didn't put bridges, they would still be attached, but they might be kind of floppy. So just looking at how different, it's helpful to look at different stencil designs and see how artists are designing their stencil design. So maybe next slide, Harmony. Here's an example of where this artist is using the stencil letter forms to actually put in these interesting like icons. So again, thinking about how you can use those islands in ways that actually improve your design and getting creative with them. Next slide. And here's that same artist. This is kind of like a little stencil kit that he made. And so you can see so for instance, in that hand, you can see how the bridges are kind of their own design element in the palm, where that's partially holding on to the piece in the palm here that's a peninsula. Those two island pieces here, they're carefully chosen to kind of help the design of the palm. So it's just, we'll see different examples of how people are doing that. Next slide. Here's a more complex example. So this artist, you know, the inner circle on the gas mask is being held on with these bridges because otherwise that would just fall right out. So again, using that as a design. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Show you some extra complex things here so you can, you know, as we get better at this, we can dream bigger. Yeah, in this case, the artist, like the face, if it didn't have that line across the hair, that whole face would fall out. So this artist designed that kind of light highlight across the top of the hair to hold that in place. And then there's going to have a really beautiful example as the next slide. This is a really complex example. and a very delicate stencil. I imagine I'd be curious to see the actual stencil that this was made with, but yeah, this is when you're getting really very complex with this idea. But yeah, let's go to the next slide. So does anybody have any questions? Just to about the sort of bridges, islands, just materials, bridges, islands, peninsulas, and then I'm going to have you all try one. Does that all seem? Any questions? I'm not seeing any. Okay, cool. I'm explaining the bridge again. So the bridge is so in this A, this will be easier to see. In the case of this A, this little triangle in the middle would be an island where, like, if I just cut this outside part and I just had this little triangle here and I cut that whole part would just fall out. And so I had to put these lines in here that can kind of like interrupting the image a little bit, but they're bridges that hold that island in place. So that's not going to go anywhere. So it's any line that you have to kind of put into the image that will hold an inside piece in the design, so that when you spray paint through here, this will show up. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I'd like to everyone, see, we have a few more minutes. So if everyone has paper and a pencil or a pen, to make some very simple, like a letter or a very simple image that has at least one island or peninsula in it that requires a bridge. And and it's helpful for me. I kind of like to draw with something lighter, like a pencil or like a lighter, thinner pen or something like that, till I get my design worked out and I can sort of see where the bridges need to be, and then I can go over it with something thicker or a different color or something so I can really see the shape. So just try it. Give us like 5 minutes to just try something pretty simple and play with it, and then we're going to look at them. And Harmony said she's going to play us some fun music as our creativity time. How are folks doing? You need a minute or two more? Maybe just give me a thumbs up when you're wrapping up. Okay. See ya. Okay, cool. That's good. So who wants to show what they did? Yeah, was that a yes, Irene?
I can go.
Okay, cool. Please.
Okay. So I did a little like Zapatista girl.
Cool.
And my bridge is right there, kind of between down the middle of her hair.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Are the braids going to be, that's a solid shape, each braid?
This would be separate. Like this would also be a bridge right there.
Okay. Yep.
So
Cool.
this separate shape, that's a separate shape, that's a separate shape.
Uh-huh.
And this is connected, the eyebrows.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So when I'm looking at that, my only question would be is like, what's going to happen to the part of the between the eyebrow and the eye shape?
Oh, right here. Oh yeah, actually,
Yeah.
it makes sense to connect, right?
Yeah, I mean, depending, this is the sort of the question around materials and whether you're using adhesive or not and things like that, but that part will be kind of floppy.
That's true.
Yeah, but it's, you know.
This would become a peninsula.
Yeah, so it's only attached kind of on one side and it's pretty long. So that just might be one, you know, again, depending on your materials and how many you're going to make and whether or not you're using adhesive, that might be a bit tricky. So just these are all things to play with. Cool. Yeah, it's beautiful. You want to share your Shaq? You willing?
Sure. I just wrote hungry. And I didn't actually, it became harder because I wrote so small. It became harder for me to see the bridges once I colored them. But you know, there's one here, there's a couple on the ends. I got a little bit confused, I guess, depending on how large this is going to be, how many bridges I would need.
Yeah.
If it was something like actually as small as this, I could get away with a lot. But if it was going to be much bigger, then, you know, like the R would be kind of a hot mess the way I have it.
Yeah.
It was initially supposed to say hungry, hungry hippos, but I ran out.
It's very ambitious.
Yeah, it was
cool.
bit off more than I could chew.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I think that question is too, like the bigger the stencil, in some ways you can have a more complex design because the bridges don't have to be very big necessarily. So like the bigger the stencil, the bridges can be fairly small relative to the design, whereas in a small design, the bridges end up being kind of big because they have to be big enough to hold together when you start spray painting it. So, yeah. How about you, Mary? What you got for us?
Okay, so I just made like a little smiley face. It might be a really light color, but can you?
Oh, I sort of see it. Yeah, it's very, very.
It's very light. I use a very light pencil.
Yes.
So I made kind of like started making bridges to the down to the eyes, and just made multiple to make them like eyelash kind of. And then there's what did I do? Oh, just two coming down from the eyes to the mouth. And and I guess that was the part I wasn't sure. Originally, I was like trying to figure out where I would put bridges from the mouth down to the outer edge to keep it down, but I guess you could kind of figure out where you'd want to put them. But
yeah, figuring out where that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Yes. Well, you definitely have the idea. That was great. And I let's see. Jennifer, did you have something you wanted to show us?
Yeah, I could. I'm just going to talk over there.
Okay. Wait, what's happening?
Oh, okay. We're facing the problem of having two Zooms in one room. So if I have my audio on, then it echoes through.
Oh, I see what's happening. Okay.
I'm over here. Not by that refrigerator.
Let me spotlight you so you're bigger.
Yes.
You can point.
Okay.
Oh, look. Okay. So I realize in doing this that I really am not good at this, and I think I'm still really kind of confused about. Well, it's
Go
first,
for it, please.
anyway, I thought, oh well, just do words since I write, and then I realized, well, I don't know where I would put a bridge in here, but here, that these little things, of course, would be probably really floppy, I imagine, and a W,
Mhm.
and then the R
Potentially.
really floppy too. So
Mhm.
I just kind of,
Um,
as I'm sketching it, I was thinking, well, what would I need to do to make sure that those legs would be secure?
And are you imagining that you're cutting the letters out, or that you're cutting the letters become the holes that you're going to spray paint through?
That the letters become the holes that I'd spray paint through.
Right. That once you cut it out, that the piece of paper will be the square piece of paper, and the letter shapes will be empty.
Yes.
So in that case, you have the say like, let's just look at the O. If you cut the outside of that O out, then what's going to happen to that internal circle, like the inner edge of the O?
Yeah. So that's where you would need something connecting it.
Yeah, exactly. So that part is what we're calling an island.
That's the island. Okay.
That inner part is an island. So without having a bridge, that island will just fall out with the part that you just cut out. So that's the part that would definitely need some kind of a line to connect it to the bigger piece of paper. Which, yeah. So basically, like the O and the R, those inner shapes on the O and the R and the D.
Yeah.
And just to, we're going to wrap up in just a second, but just to show you like an example of a sketch that I made. I'm like, okay, I want to do a faucet, and so I'm trying to do a slightly more complex shape, and I'm giving myself little islands here, or sorry, bridges here that aren't completely necessary, but more like are just part of the design. But do you see some places where for me, I color it in because it's helpful for me to just see if there are any parts that I want to be positive, negative, which means that the part that's going to be the paper part, that's not going to be part of the stencil. Are there any of those parts that are going to fall out when I cut this?
Like where the droplet is happening?
Right. Yeah, these little shapes right here, these two shapes. So I need to like put little bridges here and here.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Jack is signaling the handle.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, these little pie shapes. I need to put some kind of bridges to connect those to this bigger piece of paper. Otherwise, when I cut around here, those will all just fall out. So, so for me, it's a really helpful tool to kind of scribble it in just so I can really see what's positive and what's negative. But yeah, that was great. Let's move on to Asa, who's going to show us some more advanced stuff about how we make these real.